Welcome to this short walkthrough, the lab of the O'Reilly training. This is meant to help you if you get stuck in the lab, or if you decide not to go through everything yourself, but you simply want to see how basically what you could do there. So let's do that. So what I will do first is run Camunda. So that's relatively simple. If I have Docker, I don't run it in daemon mode, so we see a bit of logs. I run Camunda Enterprise here. In order to do that, you need to have enterprise credentials. You can do a trial on the Camunda homepage to get them, but you can also use the community edition, the open source version, and then you don't need that. You can just, if you have Docker, you can run that. If you don't have Docker, here's an explanation how you can download the same thing, unzip it, and start it. Then you need a Java runtime locally. Okay, that's the options. If you don't want to do that, you can also leverage a managed instance, which is basically exactly the same thing. You just don't have to do that step and use an URL in the web. Okay, that's this. The next thing you have to do is you download the Camunda modeler. I'm not doing that right now. I already have it running on the local system, but it's basically, again, it's a download. You unzip it, and then you can just start it up. Now we want to start here, actually. We want to model a first Bpmn process. Let's do that. So of course, we don't save that. We want to do it from scratch. So I create a Bpmn diagram. Then this has a start event. Then what I do first is to have that user task. You can switch the task types here and say, okay, this should approve something. The next thing I want to have is a gateway. All right, so I just click on the gateway symbol here, and then it does kind of an auto layout, which is normally fine for certain use cases. By default, that's an XOR gateway, so decision point. You could change it if you want to do things in parallel here as well. The next thing I want to have is that service task. Again, I changed the task type to say, no, let's celebrate. We got something approved, and this is the end event. We're done. Right, and then I want to add the other path where I'm basically immediately done. Like this is the rejected path, and this is the all done path. Right. I just double click on this stuff in order to add some labels, which is a best practice actually to label everything. So is this approved? Then I can double click here, yes and no. And we normally also have labels on the start events, like what's the event? Okay, something was requested. So that's already a pretty good start for our process. Let's save that somewhere. And actually, for the moment, it doesn't matter too much. So I'm a big fan of storing stuff on my desktop. So that's the walkthrough process. Let's put it there. And that's already like a model. You can't yet deploy it, so you need to add a couple of things. You have to configure it. This model could already be used to discuss it with stakeholders, so that's pretty fine, but it's not yet executable because a couple of details are missing. If you try to deploy it, and you can do that, so if you go to the deploy button here, it asks you where you want to deploy it, and in my case, that's actually localhost 8080 because I started it locally, right, without the HTTPS. That's the deployment end. So that's fine. Then I can hit deploy. Well, you can see in the background something is going on in my Camunda instance. It basically rejects the deployment and it tells me why. Okay, so one of the attributes is missing on the service task. The condition on the exclusive gateway is not configured. So we still have to do that. Okay, so let's go through that. The first thing I recommend to do is to change the process ID to something more readable. So that could be the approval process, for example. And then for the training, if you're local, everything is fine. If you use the hosted version in the cloud, please do something which is unique for you, like your name and the city or whatever, because then different people might meet on the same instance and you don't want to override your deployments. Okay, so that's the ID we want to set. The next thing we can configure is the user task. For example, we can define where it's assigned to. In our case, I just use the demo user, which is per default in the installation available. So I always assign the task to the demo user. And then what you can also do is you can define a UI for that human task. Normally, I mean, in more complex scenarios, you add a HTML form yourself, you have your own UI. But especially for rapid prototyping, it's very handy that you use these so-called form fields. So here, click on the add button and say, hey, I want to have a new form field, which is should result in a process variable called approved, because I need to approve something. That's a Boolean. You can define a label. Do you approve? And you could define a default value, which I don't need to. So that's the minimum you have to configure here. You can add other form fields if you want to play around with it a bit. And the interesting thing here is this writes a process variable called approved. And I can use that in the expressions now on that gateway. So I can say basically here on that sequence flow, I can say, is it approved? And you need to use Joule in here, Java Unified Expression Language. That's why it starts with that hash and these brackets. And then you simply say approved, because that's a process variable you now have. It's a Boolean, so that means if it's true, it works that way. And you do basically the opposite here. So you can say if it's not approved, you work this way. Okay, now we configure this, we configure that, and you can also configure the service task. We will implement it actually in the next lab, so we are not doing that now, but you need to define it. What we will do is we define external tasks. We talk about that in the training a bit. And now you have to define a topic name where workers that can do that code subscribe to. I call that celebrate. And again, if you're on the managed instance, you should add something which is unique to you, that we're not like different attendees conflict with each other. Okay, that process model is pretty much deployable. So let's do that. Deploy. Click on deploy. The endpoint might be localhost, might be the URL for the cloud instance. If you're using that one, you can simply change it here and then hit deploy. Very well, that worked. What you can do now, you can open your browser, point it to localhost 8080 or to the URL for the managed instance. And then you're accessing the Command Web Apps. Demo is the username per default. And then you can go to different tools. So Cockpit is the operations tool, and there you should see your process you just deployed. Okay. There we are. Right. So that's there. Awesome. Now we can start instances for this process. The easiest thing what you can do is just hit the start button here. It will call the REST API on the workflow engine and it will start a new instance. So if I refresh here, you will see that we should have a new instance. Let's check. Should actually have a new instance. Yeah. Where's the problem? Let's quickly refresh that. There it is. Probably I haven't clicked properly the first time. Clicking is not that easy. So there we are. Approve something. That means you see all the process instances here. So if I start it again, if I refresh, I should see 2 instances waiting here now, right? And then, I mean, you can click around a bit if you like. You can click into one instance, you can see the variable, oh, no variables attached, and so on and so forth, right? Then the next thing you can do is you can switch the application and can go to task list. And task list is kind of the end user user interface where you can see what's going on. If you start with a fresh installation, you have to add that simple filter, which basically says, hey, show me all tasks. Because here you normally add filters like, hey, only show my personal tasks or tasks for certain groups I'm in and so on and so forth. But the easiest thing is to have all tasks. And then you see the 2 tasks, which I just created. You can look into where I am, the diagram. Yeah, that's my process. And you have your form field if you approve or not. Let's approve, then I complete. And if I go back to cockpit, hang on. No, sorry. Go back to the overview. Then I see that one instance moved on in order to celebrate, which we will do in the next lab. Okay. One thing which is a nice addition to that lab, if you like, you could also in the start form, you can add a form field where you say, hey, what's that something I want to approve? So you can say something as a string. What do you want to be approved? Right. And then you can, for example, show that something here as well. So something type string thing that is requested to be approved, right? Then again, you can deploy it. You can start an instance. And now an interesting thing is if you refresh here, you will see that there are still the two instances running here, but you see that you have multiple versions. So you can switch to version 2. The visual hasn't changed, but the new instance I just started was started in that new version, right? And that means if I now start it via task list, it always starts the latest version. So now you are prompted with something. So let's say I want to order Burns O'Reilly book, which I would appreciate if you do. So I start that, I get the approval form. I might have to refresh that. Right, so should be probably that one, right? So that's the newest one, and there you see the form has changed, so I can read what's approved, what's requested, and approve it, and I'm done. Okay, awesome. That's it for the very first start. Just give you a feeling of what you need to do. We will wire up the service task in the next lab, and feel free to play around with the whole environment to test out things you're interested in. I mean, that's a very basic process, but it's a good basis to start with, and now we can explore everything there. Have fun with that, and continue in the training in a minute.